evening.
Very welcome to all of you. My name is Martin Jean. I'm director of the Institute of Sacred Music, and with my colleague, Dean Greg Sterling and Dean Katie Lofton, Dean Tamar Gendler, we're all thrilled to welcome all of you, both gathered here in Marquand Chapel and all around the world, I think, tuning in on our live stream. It is a great pleasure to welcome you in this space on behalf of my colleagues in the Institute of Sacred Music, Yale Divinity School, and throughout the university. On such a momentous occasion as this, that welcomes an entire and significant new program to this university community, my mind is drawn to the passage in the book of Exodus, in which the prophet Moses is told, "Come no closer, remove the sandals from off your feet, for the place on which you stand is holy ground." It is a privilege to be in the presence of the scholars and artists who lead us tonight in this reflection and celebration and who help us usher in this moment. Dr. Cornel West, sir, very welcome to you. Dr. Cheryl Townsend-Gilkes, very welcome to you. Thank you for being here. And it's an honor to welcome these amazing artists, musicians, Eric Johnson, drums, Shelton Gray on bass, Pamela Jean Davis on piano, Joy Woolfolk on guitar, our very own ISM fellow, borrowed from Rutgers, Dr. Melanie Hill on violin. And I'm one of the organ teachers here, so I just have to geek out a little bit because we are in the presence of one of the planet's greatest organists, Brother Derek Jackson.
Yes.
Welcome to all of you. Even beyond these four walls and beyond the places to which my voice is now reaching, we are in the presence of a communion of saints, people both living and dead, who formed the communities that created the sounds of the Black Church. It is they who make this ground holy, who sanctify this space by their vision, power, their musical legacy. And my joy in being at this threshold with all of you is matched only by the regret I feel that it took the ISM this long to reach it. Rest assured that the steps we take this evening are only a small beginning of a long, committed journey of support that will unfold in the months and years to come. This is part one, you could say. It's the non-aerosolizing part, apparently. According to COVID protocol, I think I've got that term right. But as soon as COVID allows, there will be a lot more aerosolizing to come. And of course, I'm particularly honored tonight to celebrate the tenured appointment of Professor Braxton Shelley, who joined the faculties of ISM, YDS, and Arts and Sciences. An award-winning scholar, Professor Shelley is musicologist, musician, minister, is near a man of God as ever I've met, as witnessed by his inspiring preaching at this morning's chapel.
Yes.
Were you here? Thank you. Professor Shelley is leading this new program and will open this tonight's events in a moment with a few reflections. But first, before that happens, permit me to welcome my dear colleague, the Reverend Dr. Frederick J. Streets, former Yale University chaplain and now currently pastor of Dixwell Avenue Congregational United Church of Christ right here in New Haven, who will open our event with a word of invocation. Jerry.
Excuse us, we're cousins. To Deans Gregory Sterling, Martin Jean and Sarah Drummond, Professor Braxton Shelley, special guests, members of the faculty, staff, and students. This occasion marks one of the most important and exciting moments here at YDS, ISM, and the wider institution of Yale University. I offer this psalm of gratitude as a blessing upon the inauguration of the program in music in the Black Church at the Yale Institute of Sacred Music. Hear now and receive this psalm of gratitude. They moan their sorrows at the water's edge, and as they cross an ocean made from their tears. In a strange brush harbor land, they hushed, whispered gospel music beneath and above the sounds of their negation. Undaunted by contradictions, they birthed new songs from the music that was in their souls, a melodic bridge connecting who they were with who they would become. Down by the riverside, they found exit from oppression and humiliation and rode the wild currents of their gospel dream songs of freedom. In the land of their oppression, in this darkness, they saw Jesus. Here they waited on, waited for, as they would sometimes wail to the Lord. Here they answered the ancient question, how could they sing the Lord's song in a strange land?
I hear you, Reverend.
Yes.
Where strange meant more than foreign. Here Dorsey answered. Here the Dixie hummingbirds sang.
Yes.
Here Mahalia wondered and bellowed how we got over.
Over.
They sang about a God who was their precious Lord.
Yes.
They sang a gospel joy and about beauty in the midst of an evil grief. They conjured from their souls in the South, North, East, and West a Baptist, African Methodist, Pentecostal, gospel gumbo spirit that shouted their praise to God.
You're helping us tonight.
Sometimes with a blue note taste, or a smooth, silky, but not slippery jazz, or with a rhythm and blues strut and swag, a funk mood, a hip-hop beat, or a cadence rap, or a soulful slide. They scored the music for the scholar's lament, excited the poet's imagination, and created musical canvases upon which artists would rest their beauty. We have come to this place at this time to fill this space with a history of Black gospel music, to make a witness of its hope, and to be stewards of its healing. And for this, the people of the Creator said, thank you
Thank you.
and amen.
Amen.
It's hard to follow that. Thank you, Reverend Dr. Streets. Thank you, Martin Jean. Thank you to all of you for being here with us tonight. Good evening.
Good evening.
Come on now, let's pretend this is a black church. I'm gonna try that again. Good evening.
Good evening.
That's more like it. That's more like it. You know, across the country, at institutions of various sizes with varying resources, one can find institutes, conferences, programs, and classes devoted to the study of a host of musical traditions, American and global, confessional and commercial, blues and jazz and rock and so many more I could name have found their way to institutional acknowledgement and respect. There is, however, scarcely little in this regard focused on the music of the Black church, which I take to be one of the most important, most generative traditions ever made, practiced, sung, or sounded on this planet. My good friend Brother West says that Black sacred music is America's greatest gift to the world. There's something to that. We've gathered tonight to begin something, to start something that I hope will long continue, even when my career has come to an end. Last night we were in this space with 6 great musicians and with many of the students at Divinity School, and we had an impromptu and therefore entirely appropriate Pentecostal experience.
Yes, we did. The fire fell.
This morning in Marquand Chapel, we had a service of worship, inflected, shaped, characterized by the music of the Black church. Tonight, we're here with 2 of the foremost thinkers of any kind, but especially on questions of African American life and history and belief, and with 6 of the baddest musicians ever to pick up an instrument. We've gathered tonight for devotion, to meditate on the Black gospel tradition. I wrote a book about some of this stuff. Brother Cornell blurbed it. Sister Cheryl has engaged it in myriad ways, so we got a lot to talk about. But before that, we're going to hear from a Stellar Award-winning guitarist from Chicago, Illinois. Joey Woolfolk is going to sound the first notes of this service tonight and set us forth on our way. Thank you so much for being here. You know, I call it the black gospel tradition. I didn't make up the term. Shows up in lots of places. I'm thinking about Lawrence Levine's Black Culture, Black Consciousness, Melanie Burnham's doctoral dissertation from Indiana University back in 1980. But I like the term because it helps us think about that amazing performance. That's Richard Smallwood and Isaac Watts and Psalm 116 all at the same time. That intertextual richness, that intermusical intensity, that's a favorite thing, right, to find throughout the gospel tradition. I wonder if we could talk about tradition, about the raw materials from which the music of the Black church came to be, the conditions of its emergence, and the resonance those materials still have. Brother West.
Yeah, well, let me say that it is a blessing to return to Yale Divinity School after 37 years and to be able to sit next to my dear brother, Professor Braxton Shelley. He is an intellectual genius and artistic giant, but most importantly, he's a spiritual titan, because he realized that so much of this can become sounding brass and tinkling cymbal
Yes.
without the deep love that has been shaped and molded and honed out from Lula, his grandmother, and Jesse and Dorothy, his mother and father, and the church that shaped him. So Yale Divinity School, you should know this is a context for his witness. This is an institutional setting for the overflow of the rich tradition that produced him. And he's got his eyes on what the Greeks would call arete, which is excellence, spiritual excellence, moral excellence. And it's true, I don't know of a modern tradition that has the level of spiritual fortitude and artistic creativity and moral courage than the Black musical tradition in the modern world. And so when we talk about tradition, it's what it's over against and what it's pulling from. 400 years of systemic hatred, here come the Love Warriors. 400 years of terrorism, not a Black version of the Ku Klux Klan, here come freedom fighting, freedom for everybody. And it's not a function of skin pigmentation. It's a function of spiritual formation, ethical cultivation, and the willingness to take a risk to empty oneself, sacrifice oneself, and serve the least of these. That's what this tradition is about. That's why it's not fake and phony and fraudulent. It's what Ashford and Simpson would call a real thing. And it's hard to keep track of it in this moment of spiritual decay and moral decrepitude.
Very.
So when we talk about tradition, we talk about something that's so alive. It's all the way live, the way Lakeside would put it. It's so intense. It's so vital. It's so vibrant. It connects the cerebral with the visceral. And it reminds us of the guttural cries and wrenching moans and visceral groans of our brothers and sisters on those slave ships and slave plantations and sharecroppers and tenant farmers and inhabitants of the ghettos and the hoods and all of their rich humanity and creativity, somehow transfiguring all of that suffering and misery into something so delicate and so rich that touches us at the depths of our soul. So there's no entertainment tonight. This is not about stimulation and titillation. You can get that somewhere else. This is about a profound quest for truth. And the condition of truth is to allow suffering to speak. It's a profound quest for beauty, and Rilke is right. Beauty has to do with wrestling with terror and trauma and not allowing either one to have the last word. It's about a quest for goodness, keeping track of the evil, not just white supremacy, but you can start there. And then of the holy, And the holy has to do with precisely what my brother's text is all about. Connecting with another world that is intervening, that is invading, that is impinging upon our world. A beloved community, a kingdom of God. If that kingdom of God is within us, then everywhere we go, we ought to leave a little heaven behind in our own deeds, our own actions. So tradition has to do with the three dimensions of time. The relation of the best of the past. The integrity, the honesty, the courage, the generosity, the hope, and the love, and the faith in the present, to open up our hearts and minds and souls and bodies to another world. And that dialectical interplay between that other world impinging, that realized eschatology that you get in the physicality and materiality of the music, so you can feel something in that music that takes you out of this nightmarish, enemy-occupied territory called the world. With all of the hatred and the greed, all of the hypocrisy, all of the envy and resentment, and lo and behold, allow us to connect to something grander than that. And the grandest of all the grandest is what Coltrane would call love supreme. But it takes many different forms, and for some of us, it has everything to do with a Palestinian Jew named Jesus.
Yes.
The tradition was born in an unlikely place. I guess John Blassingame was probably on the faculty at Yale when he wrote The Slave Community. And I'm thinking now about Albert Rapto, recently
Who just left us.
deceased, and his major text, Slave Religion. I wonder if you could talk to us, Sister Cheryl, a little bit about this context from which this music emerges, the spirituals, and how this forges a path that we come to know as gospel in its various iterations.
Well, I come, first of all, let me say greetings to you all and say a special, yes, I do have to remember that. Greetings to you all and a special greeting and thank you to Brother Shelley and to the Institute for Sacred Music, to Yale, and a special greeting to Reverend Streets, who gave me an affirmation that so special, and I thank you for it. Gave me the courage to mention the Black church as a therapeutic community to some folks just yesterday, and I thank you for that. And let's talk about context, let's talk about therapy, let's talk about trauma. As you were asking the question about tradition, we heard, as you said, the Watts hymn, I love the Lord, he heard my cry. And when I was growing up, the folks from North Carolina who raised it didn't say pitied every groan, they said pitied every groan. Long as I live and trouble rise, I'll hasten to his throne. I love the Lord, he bowed his ear and chased my grief away. Oh, may my heart no more despair while I have breath to pray. And as I was hearing that, and as I was listening to your question about tradition, I thought about what I would like to call the co-creative connections that are at the foundation of this gift that Du Bois emphasized and underlined when he talked about the sorrow songs and said, and talked about that question, this country, how came it yours? Before the pilgrims landed, we were here. And he talked about these three gifts that later on in 1924 will become 9. But the music was central. It stayed unaltered in these 2 iterations of talking about the gift. And what we often fail to realize, and I felt it, I especially here, listening to our brothers and sisters on their masterfulness of the instruments, and the way in which African peoples, and there's a multiplicity that we must account for. Thanks to Raboteau, thanks to Blassingame, thanks to Weber, thanks to Michelle Sobel, thanks to so many scholars, and it is hard to believe that we have only been learning about the experience of slavery in the United States from the point of view of the people who were enslaved since 1972. There's something wrong with this picture. But thank God for Blassingame, Raboteau, and all of those who began to pick. And what we learn is this agency, these co-creative connections among African peoples, but also between the Africans, the Europeans, and the natives. And again, this Watts hymn, this 17th, let me get my century straight, 18th century hymn based on Psalms that Africans selected. There was a part of building the tradition that not only brought African songs, not only brought African ways of thinking, and a range of African ways of thinking. That included Islam. We don't think of Islam as an African religion, but Islam was older in Africa than Christianity is here in this world today. We've got to remember these things. And the way in which people use their cultural capital to select, to choose, and then to create. And it's right at the same time that Europe is going through its upheavals about scripture, about the use of it, about something called a Protestant Reformation. At the same time, Africans are coming and taking a view of this Christianity that tries to say that you will forever be ordained to be a slave. And they said, everybody talking about heaven ain't going there. And came up with a critical view, made that choice that Howard Thurman saw as the religion of Jesus. Thank you, Brother Cornell. And built and selected, and by the time the Civil War comes along, we have 6,000 songs circulating, if we take Lovell's count seriously, 6,000 songs circulating in oral tradition. Songs that flag pieces of the Bible for us, that let us know what we should, the things to which we should pay attention in order to be a Christian in our hearts, in order to understand who will have a robe and who will walk the streets of gold. So we also learn that we don't exclude what we can use. And so what is this gospel music tradition? And this book, one of the things about this book is that Professor Shelley has chosen someone who is, as he says, paradigmatic of contemporary gospel. But Richard Smallwood, in his personhood and his background and training, represents that tradition among African Americans of negotiating diversity among us and with others, negotiating diversity of musical traditions, negotiating how we appropriate and recreate and how we share. And so we have someone who represents a lot of Black choir directors in our churches who sought to expose all of the children to every kind of music in order to make new music. Let me tell a personal story. I went to a church where the choir director would not let you join the junior choir until you were 8 years old. And I remember living in agony until I was 8 years old. And every Sunday they sang, I would watch them come down the aisle in their surplices and sing. And I waited and waited, and finally I got to be 8 years old and joined the choir. And what it meant was singing songs in church on the Sunday that we were supposed to sing. It meant singing at the programs and teas sponsored by the different clubs in our churches. It meant that we had to sing spirituals. It meant that we had to sing gospel songs. It meant that we had to sing anthems. We had to learn Joyce Kilmer's Trees. Yes, we had to learn all of those things. But it also meant that we got invited to the other churches to sing at their programs. And the nice thing about the programs was there were all these ladies that knew how to make these great cakes. And these little sandwiches. And it wasn't until I did a funeral a couple of months ago that I found out what the key ingredient was to the chicken salad that I love so much. No, I'm not going to tell you. But the thing was, I was Baptist. We got to go to the Methodist Church. We got to go to the Holiness Church. We got to go to the AME Church. We got to go to the AME Zion Church. We got to go to the Pentecostal churches. We got to go to all these different churches and hear all these different singers. We got to hear the Swan Silvertones when we were the sort of local folks. And teenagers grew up singing these songs. And it was so wonderful. So by the time I was 10 years old, I just thought it was so wonderful. And I said to my two little friends, they were a bit younger than I was because I escorted them to kindergarten when I was in 3rd grade. So they were a little bit younger, but they were Catholic. And I would go to the Catholic church and sit in the back and wait for them to finish catechism class so we could go out and play. And they didn't want all their literature, so I would take it home and read it. And I found out there were doctrinal differences when I accused my mother of committing a venial sin, and I found out that didn't go over very well. But I said to my friends, because remember, I'm going to all these different churches. Why? To sing. To sing. To sing the Lord's song. This was Sundays. This was my Black World on Sundays in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And I said to my friends, you've got to come and visit my church. And they said to me, we can't come. The priest, they're Catholic, won't let us. This is before Vatican II. So my response as a 10-year-old was very simple. Don't tell the priest. But that didn't work because then they said to me very seriously, but we can't, we'll go to hell. And that division, and I stood there by that tree on Flag Street that I later learned was the tree in front of the house where Du Bois lived. And I remember closing my eyes. Now I know it was an epiphany, but when you're 10 years old, you don't know what an epiphany is. And I closed my eyes and said, thank you, Jesus, for making me colored so I can have all this good music. That gift. But that also allowed the interaction across denominational boundaries so that we knew we had a gift to share. We had a story to tell to the nations. And the deep pain that I couldn't bring friends who were afraid they would go to hell, so they could not share that beautiful music. So this gospel tradition shaped me, made me, and it's deeply personal. And to understand the larger context of this 400 years and the fact that Africans and their descendants are creating a tradition at the same time that those who would enslave them and keep them enslaved are also trying to build a tradition, and that the criticism of that tradition is built into the music so you don't totally lose your mind in America. It's healing, and I thank God for making me color.
Me too. One of the many eclecticisms and forms of this richness you're talking about is represented in the number and kind of instruments that will be deployed here tonight. Hammond organ, beautiful, grand over there, the drum kit, and bass guitar and lead guitar, and violin. Mm-hmm. All these working together to express some of the most central canonical pieces of the Black gospel tradition. And so we're going to hear one of those now from Dr. Melanie R. Hill, who joins us, and I can hardly wait. Mm-hmm.
Lord have mercy.
That's Kurt Carr. You know, I interviewed him for the book, and I think I got my favorite quote in the whole book from Kurt Carr. I asked all the musicians I talked to describe, to define what gospel is to them. Kurt Carr said, gospel is a chameleon.
Yes.
It mirrors and extends all the currents happening in the broader musical world. He called it a chameleon. I was struck by that term as a way of explaining the traffic back and forth between traditions, straddling the line that in some traditions becomes a dichotomy between the sacred and the secular, a dichotomy that doesn't really hold when talking about black music, period. I'm thinking about this quote, thinking about the important nodal moments. We find Thomas Dorsey making his way from Villa Rica, Georgia, to Chicago, spending some time in Gary, Indiana. A straight up blues man. You know, you can check out some of his lyrics. It's a little
Rough.
yeah. I wouldn't dare express them in such hallowed ground. Suffice it to say, Tommy Dorsey is a blues man,
the
right?
Funky,
Thomas
funky,
A.
funky,
Dorsey.
funky.
Yes.
Don't call him Tommy.
Andrew Dorsey.
Yes.
Georgia Tom,
Yes.
as he's called, in the blues. And it's the same depth and authenticity and fervor in the blues space that in a different moment of biographical challenge gives you a song like Precious Lord. Take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I wonder, Brother West, if you want to talk about musicians working on both sides of this alleged line, how sacred and secular mutually influence in the black gospel tradition.
Yes, yes. Well, that's a powerful question. No, and to start with a towering figure like Thomas Dorsey, who is inseparable from Reverend James Harrison Lorenzo Smith in January of 1932, which was a moment of a great renaissance, much deeper than Harlem. We had some nice middle-class writers trying to speak to the white audience to deal with their fears, insecurities, and anxieties. That with Dorsey and Theodore Fry and Reverend Smith, who had just broke from Olivet Baptist into Ebenezer, is black folk speaking to black folk. The white normative gaze has absolutely no presence whatsoever. It's human to human, chocolate, chocolate, all the way down. With no folk looking over your back and wondering whether you deserve a certain kind of approval and recognition. You see, there were Thomas Dorsey and Theodore Fry and Reverend Smith, and then the break from Ebenezer to Pilgrim Baptist Church with the dancing preacher with J.C. Austin, with Dorsey now playing in the Genius for New Orleans named Mahalia Jackson singing. So all three of them together, what are they doing? They are keeping the best of a tradition alive, because tradition suffocates as well as liberates. And if your tradition gets stale and barren, it's going to get in the way of the Word made flesh. It's going to get in the way of the Spirit dwelling among us. And that was part of the battle in Chicago, wasn't it?
Yep.
You got the nice upper middle class folk. We don't want to hear all of that southern Mississippi stuff. Sounds like the devil's music. Get off the crack pipe. There ain't no devil's music here. It's funky, it's bloody, it's tear-soaked, it is human all the way down, just like Jesus on the cross with that blood flowing at the foot of that cross. That's the humanity. That's where the funk is. That's where the love is. That's where the freedom is. That's where the struggle is. That's where the shuddering is. That's what the music is all about. Mm-hmm. So if it's Friday night and it's not Christocentric, it's still profoundly human. Mm-hmm. And Sunday morning, and it is Christocentric, it's still profoundly human. You just looking at something grander, like that last word in Dante's Inferno and the Purgatorio and the Paradiso, the stars from the gutter, the stars from space and time, the stars from the mess in which we find ourselves. And the greatness of the black tradition is that dialectical interplay between we gangsters in the gutter, that's human beings in space and time. We all got gangster proclivities. I was a gangster before I met Jesus, and now I'm a redeemed sinner with gangster proclivity. But from that gutter, another world, seen, felt, and worth fighting for, sacrificing for. And that's why we're here. The three of us wouldn't be here without that tradition. And I want to add, Matei, when you were talking about Blassingame, Rapporteur, I would add the distinguished Professor Cheryl Townsend Gilkes. She's part of that cloud of witnesses. And even here at Yale, you got Brother Jenny, you got Sister Turman, is that right? Mm-hmm. You got students here, y'all know who I'm talking about? You got Brother Gansby. The tradition goes on. And Yale didn't design that decades ago. The only reason why those towering black figures are here at Yale is because you had everyday black people hit the streets and say, we want truth and beauty and justice everywhere, including Yale Divinity School. And Yale Divinity School said at its best, come in. And at its worst, it said, oh Lord. These black folks still coming. But it's a beautiful thing because it's the best and the worst in all of us. The hounds of hell is wrestling with the souls of our own, the battlefield of our own souls, and we're trying to get some countervailing forces against those hounds of hell and leaving that heaven behind.
I'm thinking about pathos, right?
Yes.
Yeah. About intensity. That word shows up over and over again in this book because I'm trying to find a way to convey the reality being mediated by sound. It's not just something sung about or represented, imagined, it's incarnate, right? That's what's happening. Materialization in the body. Absolutely. You called it fleshification one time. You were talking about my book on some online YouTube show, and I said, I like that. I need to go back and call Oxford, say, hold up, I need to add a word. That'd be the next one, fleshification. All right, the fleshified gospel or something like that. But I'm interested in these everyday realities, everyday struggles, everyday pains. Makes me think about your article about the black church as a therapeutic community. We saw some of that last night.
Oh, Lord.
This space became a black church. Div school students in week 9 of the semester trying to, get through. Got through in a different way. We got to see that here in flesh, but this, you can hear the therapeutic mandate, the therapeutic expectation. We might call it a therapeutic logic woven into the grammar of these songs, of these sermons. I wonder if you want to share with us something about that project of yours, where it came from, how you see it fitting in to the study of the Black church in general.
Well, let's see if I can be brief. I mean, I could go on a little while, but one of the beauties of this book is the conversation that you have. Not only have you centered Richard Smallwood, who addresses a range of emotions, and for those of you who may not have learned every song that Richard Smallwood has given out, one of the nice things about reading this book is as you read, you can go tap, tap, tap on YouTube and call up the singers, call up the songs. Don't be afraid to do that, because it will help you. It is healing for the soul in a very big way. The Kurt Carr song that was chosen speaks to the sacred geography that is a part of African American consciousness. It's for every mountain, and for every valley, and for every test. You think of the selection, again, I talk about the appropriation of, not only the creation within the hush harbors, not only the songs that people began to sing to address their very real situation. Earlier today in class, I played a clip from an interview of a formerly enslaved man who said that the first spiritual that was created in the Sea Islands, that he learned that from his mother and his aunts and his grandmother. I mean, all of these women's voices who carried the tradition, the story of this particular spiritual, which was titled Knee, K-N-E-E, Bone, Kneebone Bend. Kneebone in the wilderness, kneebone bend. In other words, get on your knees and pray. And he said the only thing they knew how to do, this is cultural capital that survived coming across the water. They knew how to pray. And these were peoples who sang their prayers. Muslims sing their prayers. Jews sing their prayers. The Christians need to learn to sing their prayers. African American Christian deacons sing their prayers. Charles Blow talks about it in Fire Shut Up in Your Bones. He talks about the deacons he grew up with who sang their prayers and shouted their songs. And so that pentatonic scale, those quarter tones that lined out hymns in preparation for prayer, that said, the Spirit of the Lord comes on the wings of a song. You invoke the presence, and then you tell God all about it, and you get quite detailed about it. Sacred geography. Mountaintops have problems, valleys have problems, tests have problems, but when we get through it with God, precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. At the river I'll stand. All of that, we are on a journey. We put on our traveling shoes. We move forward no matter what the test. And what is the selection from the Euro-American tradition? Must I be carried to the skies on flowery beds of ease, while others fought to win the prize and sailed through bloody seas. And it's amazing to how folks did this. I just wanted to also make a note. Not only do we have the sacred geography, but we have to remember our brother James Cone, who told us what blues were. What were blues? A secular spiritual. It's almost as if that people coming out of slavery with this incredible body of material, which was not the only songs they sang. How did the spirituals get their names? People like Higginson and others asked the people, what are these songs you're singing? And they would respond, oh, these are spiritual songs, as opposed to the work songs, as opposed to the play songs, as opposed to the dance songs, as opposed to the party songs. Well, these are the spiritual songs. So there was an even bigger body of work. And if you've ever heard the songs from Parchment Prison, the work songs, those of you who have seen the movie, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou, which opens up with a recording of it's actually a recording of prisoners in Parchment. That's where, it's interesting, it's a white film, but it's the black voices, and they had to chase down the lead singer on that And he was somebody who fled the South. Parchman was rough, and they treated black people so bad in Parchman, they were able to start treating white people so bad. This is one of the other things we understand about this kind of oppression. But they had to chase down, because there are rules about how you utilize folk music in capitalist society, intellectual property, and so they had to store up the money and find the lead singer, and they found him. His wife was the pastor of a sanctified church. That's how they found him. And they had fled Mississippi, and this is this Mississippi corridor that you're talking about, going to Chicago. They had fled after he got out of Parchman, and they had gone to Chicago. They had settled. She founded a church, and praise God, he had 2 daughters who had finished law school and knew how to protect his cultural capital. But so when next time, if you have a chance to see that movie, or next time you see that movie, or look for the Parchman song, that's where that came from. So when people were asked, well, what are these songs you're singing? Well, these are the spiritual songs. And Cone intimates that basically when we get to the end of the Civil War, when people are singing Jubilee, and it's not just so happy, but go back and look at Leviticus. What is Jubilee? It's the day of the Lord. It's the letting go. It's the release of debts. It's the sending out people free with the ability to care for themselves. And as one former slave who was interviewed asked, what did you think freedom was going to be? He said, I thought we were going to be rich. We were going to work as hard for ourselves as we did for our masters. And so that disappointment that all of a sudden we've gotten over this mountaintop, but we're now in a new valley, we need songs for the big spiritual stuff. And we need songs for the everyday stuff. And in a sense, Cone tells us the blues are secular spirituals dealing with that total life, that freedom that's not really free. How do we deal with it? How do we deal with personal pain and heartbreak that is different from the kind of pain that comes when a family must deal with the body after a lynching? So this is, and again, let me just say something about this Mississippi corridor. All of this new scholarship that has given us a better, more nuanced, deeper, more complicated understanding of who the Africans were who came. Gwendolyn Midlo Hall, who takes us into the Mississippi corridor with her work in Louisiana, where one of the few places where they actually recorded the ethnicities of the Africans. And then when she was there with her, and this is what we're up against with this knowledge issue. You know, when we do this stuff, she went down there with a portable copier and copied all the court records. And the people, when they found out she was copying all the court records, and it was the records of all the slavery in the area, what did they do? They went behind her and destroyed the records. And fortunately, they were able to reconstruct the records because she had photocopied all the records, and they were able to bring them back. But it was one of the few places where they recorded the ethnicity. And now there's a Senegalese scholar who's talking about how he recognizes the song tones, the scales, the music that are in the Mississippi blues tradition that also come from his Senegalese home. And he is the scholar at the Whitney Plantation. I can't remember the name of the book. You know, the brother who's written the book about going to the different places to look at how slavery is remembered. You know who I'm talking about. Yeah, okay, all right. Well, I'm older than you are, I'm entitled to forget, okay. We've had this joke earlier, but this whole Mississippi corridor piece that carries forward both blues and gospel, and they merge in St. Louis, they merge in Chicago. Keep in mind, every so often I go to Nashville. One little thing, and then I'll be quiet. And when I go to Nashville, if I have control of my hotel, I stay at the hotel that's across from the museum about country music. And I had an attitude when I first started teaching that there was this other tradition over here, you know, the political boundaries of culture. But then I had to start dealing with Southern culture as I taught African American studies, and realized that students needed to understand it's African, it's European, and it's Native, it's indigenous, and that these interact. And I had to change my attitude when I met some African brothers and sisters. And it turned out that in my 23andMe, they were from some of the same peoples. And I had some Native Americans living with me, and I'm like, they like country music. Why? And then I went to the museum, and they kept up a permanent exhibit for 2 years on Ray Charles. They claim him. But there's this huge mural, Thomas Benton mural, about the origins of country music. And remember, this is white space. This is the white view of our tradition. When I say our, I mean white people saying our. And even in that, there's a brother on the edge of the mural with a fiddle in his hand. And we now know a little bit more. But that whole issue of these musical traditions that heal trauma, that require people to move, and we now know that our ancestors understood movement and song are healing, and they are important for trauma, and the psychiatrists are now discovering that in this century. Praise God.
You're talking about the Mississippi corridor. Makes me think about the Mississippi Delta.
Oh,
All that area down there.
Fannie Lou Hamer.
There was a radio station down there, WBBP 1480, that stretches across that, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee area. The station was owned by the late Bishop Gilbert Earl Patterson until his death. Still in operation. I listened to it a couple days ago. This Mississippi Delta thing has me thinking about a street in Memphis, an intersection. There's G. Patterson Avenue and B.B. King Boulevard. Not too far away from the church, Temple of Deliverance Church of God in Christ. Anyway, all this gets me thinking about the next musician who is going to bless us tonight. I spent most of my adolescence watching his videos on YouTube. He was the traveling organist for Bishop Patterson. And I became enamored in an enduring kind of way with his harmonic imagination, his sense of musical gesture. And I should warn you that last night he messed us up. So if you don't want to be messed up, you might need to do something else for a second. Anyway, Derek Jackson is a leading organist, one of the most revered, certainly in this generation. Musician, does a lot of work in the Church of God in Christ, which is the largest black Pentecostal denomination. And it was always been a dream of mine to bring him to some campus I worked on. And having done that, gotten to spend just a little bit of time with this amazing musician, I've been blown away by his humility, by the sincerity of his spirit, and it redounds to the benefit of all those who hear him. And so, anyway, I'm going to be quiet because what we want to hear is Brother Jackson on the Hammond organ. Either one of y'all got something to say after that? I need a minute.
Yes, Lord. My Lord.
This is true of every musician playing with us here tonight. I think we got so excited we moved our table around, but y'all just
The old folks
Y'all
called it
just-
breaking up housekeeping.
yeah, that's I mean, you know, Derek, that's your fault. Anyway,
Yeah.
I'm struck, quite obviously, but also, you refer to this often, Brother West, genius. a political assertion, especially on these shores with reference to black people. But in the face of such brilliance, such amazing, overwhelming affect, skill, intelligence, what do you say? This is distinctive experience, but also the kind of thing that happens in churches across the country and around the world, Sunday in and Sunday out. Musicians honing their craft, rendering praise to their God,
And sharing it.
yes, with their fellow worshipers. This beautiful communion around the tradition, around the gift. What do you mean when you say that black sacred music is America's most important gift to the world?
I think it's the most profound wrestling with what it means to be human and modern and new world. And it happens to be in African bodies and minds and hearts and black skin. And therefore, when we talk about how do you come to terms with death and dread and disease and disappointment and disillusionment, Ralph Ellison says the blues ain't nothing but a personal narrative of a catastrophe lyrically expressed. And then the blues inflicted gospel, which is profoundly cruciform, cross-centered. Not jumping to a crown with no cross, but that long, long Saturday when God is dead. And you're not yet surprised by joy. That's what the black musical tradition in general, with the black sacred musical tradition at its root, is wrestling with. And it goes back actually to vanilla brothers and sisters coming out of the Reformation. It's true. It was Martin Luther who said, next to the Word of God, music is God's greatest gift to humanity and worthy of highest praise. He was a music composer himself.
Mighty Fortress.
Mighty Fortress was one of them. It's not bad. It's on the dean's list, you know. It's not Walter Hawkins or, you know, Roberta Martin, but I mean, it's all right, Martin.
Yeah.
But what he was getting at there is that because the Protestant tradition put the kerygma and the proclamation of the word at the center of the liturgy, music was on a continuum with it. He writes a preface to one of the texts where he says, the sermon in song, because language is inadequate. That raid on the ineffable that T.S. Eliot talks about in the Four Quartets, another great Christian poet, understanding the insufficiency of language, and four quartets, partly echoes of Beethoven's quartets and Schubert's, but the centrality of music. Now Calvin comes along and says, well, the music is important, but it's got to be moderated by the word, because he's read a lot of Plato, and you remember Plato bans the flute in the Republic because the music creates disorder and dissonance, and he wants order and hierarchy. So Calvin says, well, okay, we can have music, but it's got to be tied to the word. That's why Calvin wouldn't allow for instrumental music in the church at all. It's got to be somehow tied to the word. Which means, Brother Derek, you would have been, they dragged you straight to jail, because all that good stuff, profound stuff you've given us with no words, but speaking so profoundly. Now,
yes.
But it's interesting, Swigley, who was the most musical of all of the reformers, wrote a beautiful song, the Plague Song, and he suffered from the plague in 1519, almost died. And then turned it into music. And because he's such a musician, he bans music in the church, destroys the organs in Zurich, completely. How come? Genuine worship for him was inward and privatistic and individualistic. And if you listen to the music too much, it'll sound so good that you'll forget about the word. Now, we've got some situations like that in our churches now. Let's just be honest about it. Once that commodification and marketization sets in, once spectacle sets in rather than genuine theological substance.
Thank you.
Once the musicians become praise teams rather than old rich gut bucket choirs.
Thank you.
Come on, sir.
I
Oh,
agree.
yes.
You're speaking for me. Thank you.
I'm telling you, so Swigley, he was wrong in his conclusions, but that vanilla brother had an insight. And what we love about Derek, what we love about Joey, what we love about Melody and the other artists is they understand that it's not about the music per se, it's about the God that they are praising and glorifying in
Yes,
the gifts
yes.
that they have using that European instrument for an aim that goes far beyond any particular country, any particular flag. It's about the cross. Is that right, Brother Derek? That's exactly it. That's what we stand on. That's how black folk preserve their sanity and dignity and delicacy in any sense of empowering and loving their children in the face of such a barbaric white supremacist civilization. That's what the music did. And if you didn't get that right, you could snap any minute. And you might snap anyway, but you got bounced back. It's real, you see. So it's not a plaything. That music is not some kind of mamby-pamby display of how talented you are. But it uses genius in the profound Russian sense. It's not isolated individuals who are geniuses. The Russians talked about geniality. It's the largeness of your heart, your mind, and your soul, and your willingness to largely use your gifts in order to help somebody, empower somebody, enable somebody. Geniality. That's how Chekhov understood it. That's how Tolstoy understood it from the Russian Orthodox tradition. And we come from a tradition of lift every voice.
Yeah, every voice.
Every voice, which means the Russians got something to say, let's listen. If the Lutherans got something to say, even though Luther got too much anti-Jewish contempt, he's crushing the peasants, he's wrong on that, but he still got something to say. If Hank Williams got something to say, let that white brother do his blues thing. Even though we might like Sam Houston, Son Houston, Robert Johnson a little bit more, but that's all right. Hank got something going on. The openness of it, that to me is the best of the human spirit. That's why all this attempt to argue that, black music is the best in America, that's too parochial. It's the best in the modern world of what America has to give to the world. We're talking on an international, cosmopolitan, global level because of what? Very much because of Romans 5:3. How did they transform their suffering into endurance and transform that endurance into forms of character, of integrity, honesty, decency to help somebody to generate hope as a verb, not just a virtue? To keep on pushing, a genius from Chicago named Curtis Mayfield said. How do you keep on? The kairos that sits at the center of this text. The shattering of chronos, of everyday life and routine. The meaningful moments to sustain a kinesis, a movement with an end of kenosis. How much are you emptying yourself in order to help somebody else before the worms get your body and you found out what's happening after your experience in space and time? That's what our ancestors at their best understood. And that's why Toni Morrison says she thinks that most of the ancestors that she knew are spiritually wiser than we are today.
Yes.
That's another lecture. That's another issue. But that's a profound challenge, Toni Morrison. And she's Catholic like Dante, like Aquinas, like our Roberto before he became Russian Orthodox.
But-
Toni Morrison.
But I think he became Russian Orthodox coming out of Catholicism because he recognized, and this is what I was talking about earlier about the co-creative connections. We're having struggles in our churches because there are Euro-American notions of how to do things, and there are African-American notions of how to do things. And one of those tension points is our funerals. And they can become challenges. And when I saw that Orthodox funeral, I stood up and I said, Al, I understand. That's true. Because that last filing past and greeting, and how many of us have been to services of Beyond the Ivy Wall? How many of us have been to services, Omega services? How many of us have been to fraternal services where we put that evergreen in the casket before it is closed? All of those things that we come from a people who resisted, treating people who die like trash, and insisted on having services where we sing. So many of our young people, I can remember this as a child, well, not as a child, later on as a college student, where friends who the only time they went south, whose parents had moved north, the only time they went south was, of course, for family funerals. So that was the only time they ever heard a meter hymn. And so they so associated it with funerals, they didn't realize that they could sing it and encourage their own souls, even if no one else was around. But these tensions, and so when I saw Al's funeral, I said, Al, I understand, and you also have grasped it, because Al's work made us look back to see what Africans and their descendants had done for themselves to become those self-catechizing Christians by the Christian communities by 1828. And this is so important, this wisdom that the elders had in terms of how to deal with death and life. What is it we say in the burial service? In the midst of life we are in death. To whom do we seek for comfort but of thee, O Lord? Who, and the songs help us to talk to God about it. It helps us to say, I feel, thank you, Brother Jackson, no ways tired, and even reminds us of the root in a spiritual, I feel no ways tired, oh yes, Lord, because I want to shout glory when the world is on fire. Oh yes, Lord, that we move through difficult places and all kinds of challenges, but if we can pull out a song and help us to get over how we got over, we can do it and we can face life. Toni Morrison is right about the elders being wiser, but I think we are faced in places like this, with books like this, with challenges like this, to reshare that wisdom, to understand what those strengths were for survival and for thriving. How did that psychic capital help them get over? How is it that we can have grandmothers and great aunts who witnessed lynchings and yet could sit and say to their children and grandchildren, the doors will open someday. I will prepare you for those doors. I will make sure that you have faith and strength to go forward. How do we do that? The gift of that song, and that gift has reached over to other people. Bernice Johnson Reagan does a wonderful history of, for instance, We Shall Overcome. And she takes it back to the tobacco strike in Charleston, South Carolina, and she takes it back to C.A. Tindley, and she points out the fact that Tindley, again, these are people who are mentioned in this book. You got to read this book. Tindley, who was a Methodist minister, who walked off the Eastern Shore, went to Philadelphia, was a hod carrier, and then became a minister. And he was so humble and wanted to learn. He went and sat in a yeshiva with children to learn Hebrew in order to be a better minister. And he wrote these wonderful hymns, but the hymns were grounded in the oral tradition of the spiritual. So when the storms of life are raging, stand by me. Which means that you're going to face storms of life. When the storms of life are raging, stand by me. When the world is tossing me like a ship on a raging sea, thou who rulest wind and water, stand by me. And it goes back, Lord, hold my hand while I run this race. Lord, hold my hand while I run this race, because I don't want this running to be in vain. Lord, stand by me while I run this race. You see the connection? And then it jumps all the way over to we shall, I sort of moved from we shall overcome to I'll overcome someday, right. But for those of you who remember Benny King, when the night is all of these connections, and Bernice Johnson Reagan points out these connections that Tindley makes. At one point, and this will give you an idea of what the problem, how we deal with these problems of appropriation and capital, somebody tried to actually copyright We Shall Overcome. And we would have had to pay a fee every time we have a Martin Luther King breakfast in order to sing that song. And they had to battle to go back through all this layer of tradition, which Bernice Johnson Reagan, there's actually a film where she talks about we shall overcome, takes us to we overcome someday, and the spiritual I'll overcome. Thank you for getting me back on. You can tell I really like Stand By Me. Okay. And, but this is the struggle that we have with holding on to the music that brought us through. But what we need to do, the point I want to make is that we need to reteach at every level of our community the psychic capital that is necessary for pushing through. We're facing it now. All we have to do is turn on the news and realize that there is so much. What the late Judge A. Leon Higginbotham said, we are relitigating things that we thought were settled law. And the struggle is upon us now. And if we do not have the psychic capital to survive and to push forward, we could easily be pushed very far backward. This music is one of the medicines that helps us to stand forth and go forward. I don't know how many times I have struggled in academic settings where I've had to go into my office and sing myself into a position where I can be tactful and not behave in such a way that I will lose my witness with a dean or another professor. And it has been the gift of the music. It has been the gift of the music. It has been the gift of the music. And as a result, thank you, Brother Jackson, I feel no way as tired.
One of the main prescriptions in this psychic capital you're talking about is an assertion in this hymn. What a friend
Yes, we have.
we have in Jesus. All our sins and griefs to bear. What a privilege it is to carry.
Everything.
Sister Pam Jean Davis, Minister of Music at the Fountain in Houston, Texas. One of my favorite pianists in the entire world. She's going to bring us a selection. Well, the band can stay right in their places. Because we're just about out of time. And we got one more song, and I got one more thing to say.
My Lord.
I'm so glad you ended in that way, Pam, because Brother Derek ended with James Cleveland, and it's possible to tell the story of gospel with a lot of proper nouns that are dudes. But I'm so glad that we could talk instead about Margaret DeRoe and Mimi Red and Pamela Jean Davis. She played on the original recording of Order My Steps.
Yes.
And she brought it back to us tonight. Dr. Jokes, you wrote a book entitled If It Wasn't for the Women. And this is that claim being worked out on the level of the gospel tradition. The organizations, the institutions, the people.
The women who worked with Dorsey.
Yes, Sally Martin and so forth, without whom the National Convention of Gospel Choirs and Choruses would not have taken hold.
Mother Willie Mae Ford Smith.
Yes, yes.
The soloist girl.
Magnolia Lewis Butts, who
Yes.
wrote Let It Breathe on Me, the hymn, and was an early gospel choir director in Chicago. There's so much to be said about all of this. I started off by saying that this is the beginning. That makes it be okay if we're out of time, because we'll be back over and over again. I would like to give both of my co-panelists just a minute apiece for your most important thing you didn't get to say yet. And then we're gonna ride out of here with the ensemble ministering to us Richard Smallwood's Anthem of Praise.
Very quickly, I will just say what I wrote down before any of this happened. I wanted to remind people how to read this book. It is a book full of technical theology, and it is full of theological music theory. But once you work your way through the chapters, even if you can't read music, you see and hear music differently and better and more expansively. So I just cannot say enough wonderful things about this wonderful book that is going to be a very important mark that will help us reclaim tradition for our psychic capital, for our healing of the soul, so that we can engage in the struggle that's necessary to make this a better world. Thank you very much.
I would just say what the Mighty Dells from Chicago would say, oh, what a night.
Yes.
And I want to thank my dear brother Braxton for bringing us together. Yale is so blessed to have him. They
Yes.
really are. They're so blessed to have him. Really.
Yes, speaking for me when you say thank you.
The great tradition flows through his heart, mind, and soul, even as he gives it his own unique and singular twist in terms of lifting his voice. And he brings such magnificent artists to remind us that no matter how dim and grim the moment is, that dimness and grimness will not have the last word.
Amen.
And there's nothing like that. You know, Bach used to always put at the beginning of so many of his texts, he would say, Jesus help me, to God be the glory. And there's deep continuity between those words and what we have in these magnificent artists, keeping alive this great tradition and putting a smile on the faces of those great and grand ones who came before.
Thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you, Brother Cornell, Sister Cheryl. Band,
And thank you, Brother Brass.
take us away.
good. God